Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Florida is recognized.
Good morning, Mr.
Can I
Durham.
just complete that answer, Lauren? But I don't want to lay any blame at their part. I made that decision to make a statement. They were not involved in it. Right, Nora Danahy.
Gentlelady from Florida.
Right. Nora Danahy, a friend of mine, a very good lawyer, an honest person.
Why did she resign?
That's Nora Danahy. That's why we brought her on.
Why did she resign?
The gentleman's time has expired. The gentleman
Answer the question if you'd like.
Mr. Chairman, who's in charge here? Because it's not Mr. Schiff, I don't think.
It's the lady's time from Florida.
Good morning, Mr. Durham.
Good morning.
As a former federal prosecutor, I want to begin by telling you how much I appreciate your work, that of your team, and your presence here today. And you may begin by answering the prior question if you wish.
With respect to Ms. Danahy, I have the greatest respect for her. She's a friend of mine. She's very well educated. She's an honest person. We had some disagreements on issues, and I don't really have any comment beyond that. I'm not going to discuss the internal management and decision-making. I'll tell you this, that every agent and every lawyer who worked on this project had a full voice in the decisions that were going forward. I made the final decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. I'd like to focus on the Department of Justice's procedures as to FISA applications when that process is conducted appropriately. To begin with, so FISA surveillance application must include an affidavit from a federal law enforcement officer, correct?
That's correct.
And that affidavit must demonstrate cause to believe that the target of the surveillance is an agent of a foreign power. Is that also right?
Right. If it relates to a U.S. citizen, it has to be that they're a knowing agent. If it's a non-U.S. person, a knowing element is not required.
And it is intended that that affidavit should rely upon reasonable, trustworthy information, is it not?
That's correct.
Right. And in some cases, and including the case of Carter Page, those affidavits, that information can include the use of information obtained from a confidential human source, correct?
That's correct.
And when information from a confidential human source is included, would you agree that it's important that material related to the reliability or trustworthiness of that confidential human source is disclosed within the affidavit?
Yes.
And I believe you testified here earlier today that in this case, information in that Carter Page application related to the reliability and credibility of the confidential human source was not included in these applications. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
Okay. Would you tell us, in your experience, in your many years working with the department, why is it important that that type of information is included and disclosed to both federal prosecutors and to the court?
There's, when matters are submitted to the court, it's for a reason, or to a judge. It's to let an independent judicial officer weigh the question as to whether probable cause exists or not. In providing that information to independent, objective judicial officers, judicial magistrates, if there's confidential human source information that's being provided, it's important for the person, the judge who's reviewing this, to know what's the basis of the person's knowledge. Is it hearsay, or do they have personal knowledge, as an example? And then whether or not there's some track record or basis to believe that the information would be credible coming from this person.
And of course, at this stage of the proceeding, the person who's the subject of the investigation has no idea that this application is even being made or considered or reviewed by the court in most cases. So
That's
it's
correct.
solely rests with the government, the responsibility to ensure that this power, that this surveillance power that's being used is being done in a way that is appropriate and compliant with the law.
That's correct.
And you mentioned something earlier about that in this case, agents immediately moved to the most intrusive investigative means that were available, referring, of course, to the interception of live communications, correct?
That's correct. In this instance, the Bureau almost immediately, when they opened it as full investigations, it was the umbrella case, Crossfire Hurricane, and then the 4 sub-files, they immediately went to try to get FISA coverage on Papadopoulos, which they weren't able to do, and then Carter Page.
And some of the techniques for law enforcement, you know, there are a myriad of other things they can do to collect surveillance information short of this interception of communications, like poll cameras, pen registers, trap and trace, trash pulls, correct? There are many other things that in investigations are often utilized prior to taking this step of attempting to intercept live communications.
Right. Those are typically building blocks for electronic surveillance.
So based on your testimony so far, what we're hearing is that here, a FISA application was pursued without disclosing some relevant information to prosecutors or the court, without following standard procedural rules, utilizing investigative techniques that were the most intrusive without first exhausting other techniques, and instead pursuing the most invasive method possible from the outset against Mr. Page.
That's essentially correct, yes.
Now, one other thing, you mentioned earlier during your testimony that the failures identified during your investigation, that if they were not addressed, they would result in national security risks and continued public lack of confidence in our institutions of justice, that there were no overnight fixes, but we needed accountability, standards, and consequences. Would you elaborate, please?
Time the gentlelady has expired. The witness can respond.
Yeah, the national security interests that, here include liberties of the American people. One of the things that was most disturbing about the dossier, the Steele dossier, is whether or not this is, so at least some of it was Russian disinformation, whether Igor Danchenko, who personally wrote that he was responsible for 80% of the intelligence in the dossier and 50% of the analysis, whether or not Mr. Danchenko was the source of Russian disinformation. If you don't run some of those things to ground, it does affect the liberties, or potentially affects the liberties of the American people and the national security interests of this country.
Thank you, sir.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from California is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Before I begin my questioning, I want to say that the House Judiciary Committee is responsible for helping to ensure the rule of law. The chairman of this committee ignored a bipartisan congressional subpoena. The precedent sent by this chairman has damaged the ability of congressional committees to get information from witnesses and damaged the rule of law. Now, Mr. Durham, thank you for being here voluntarily today. In your report, not only did the FBI have information, as stated before, that the Australians knew that Trump Foreign Policy Advisor George Papadopoulos had suggested that the Russians were going to release anonymous information damaging Hillary Clinton. The FBI also knew and had information that the Democratic National Committee was hacked by the Russians and information was being released to the American public. The FBI also had information from various media reports that Trump had relations with different Russian businessmen, and the FBI had information that Trump said, quote, "Russia, if you're listening, I hope you're able to find the 30,000 emails that are missing." The FBI had all that information prior to opening Operation Hurricane, correct? Crossfire Hurricane, is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. If the FBI had chosen to do so, the multiple pieces of information they had would have allowed them to open a preliminary investigation.
How to escape the heat if
In our report, we say that the FBI certainly had an obligation to assess the information, perhaps make it a preliminary investigation. That's
Okay.
our
In
view.
fact, it would have been a dereliction of duty for the FBI to have just sat on their hands and done nothing with the information that they had. Is that right?
Yeah, the FBI should not have ignored that information.
Okay. It's also true, isn't it, that the Inspector General of the Department of Justice looked at this situation and concluded that not only did the FBI have enough information to open a preliminary investigation, the FBI had enough information to open a full investigation. That was the conclusion of the Inspector General, correct?
My recollection is that the Inspector General said it's a low bar and he thought that it had been met. The Inspector General didn't necessarily address.
So thank you. I'd like to enter their Inspector General's report dated December 2019 into the record, Mr. Chairman.
Without objection.
Okay. Turns out the FBI was correct. Department of Justice found that the Russians interfered in our elections in a, quote, sweeping and systematic manner. A bipartisan U.S. Senate report confirmed that the Russians interfered in the 2016 elections and that interference benefited Donald Trump. Paul Manafort, Trump's former campaign chairman, also publicly admitted to giving internal Trump campaign data to the Russians, and the U.S. Treasury Department found that this data, which it said was, quote, sensitive information on polling and campaign strategy, was then passed to Russian intelligence services. There is a phrase to describe the facts I just set forth. It's called Russian collusion. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to enter both the Treasury Department documents dated April 2021, as well as the bipartisan Senate report intelligence dated August 2020.
Without objection.
Okay. Now, Mr. Durham, I'd like to ask you the following simple yes or no questions. Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was convicted, correct?
I'm sorry, could you just repeat
Yeah,
that?
Trump's former campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was convicted, correct?
That's correct. Not in
Trump's former
connection with
foreign
these
policy
matters.
advisor to the campaign, George Papadopoulos, was convicted, correct?
That's correct.
Trump's former deputy campaign manager, Rick Gates, was convicted, correct?
Not in connection with the Russian matter.
Trump's, all right. Mr. Durham, you can hold yourself out as an objective Department of Justice official or as a partisan hack. And the more that you try to spin the facts and not answer my questions, you sound like the latter. So I'm just going to ask this simply. Trump's former national security advisor, Michael Flynn, was convicted, correct?
That's correct.
Trump's longtime advisor, Roger Stone, was convicted, correct?
I'm sorry, missed the last thing you
Trump's
mentioned.
longtime advisor, Roger Stone, was convicted, correct?
Correct.
In contrast to multiple Trump associates who were convicted, you brought 2 cases to jury trial based on this investigation, and you lost both. And so I don't actually know what we're doing here, because the author of the Durham report concedes that the FBI had enough information to investigate. And thank goodness the FBI did, because multiple Trump associates who committed crimes were held accountable. And the best way to summarize what happened is thank you to the brave men and women of the FBI for doing their jobs. I yield back.
Gentleman's time's expired. He yields back. Gentleman from California, Mr. McClintock, is recognized for 5 minutes.
First of all, Ms. Durham, I apologize for the personal attacks that have been leveled upon you by from sources on the other side of the aisle. This is what they do. This is how they argue. So we've gotten used to it, and I hope you will too at some point. The central charge in the Russian collusion hoax was that Trump campaign operatives were in contact with Russian intelligence sources. Were Clinton campaign operatives in contact with Russian intelligence sources?
That's beyond the scope of our report. I can only speak to the former, and the former is there was no such evidence. As we report in the report, there was
Was Danchenko a Russian intelligence source?
Mr. Danchenko had been investigated by the FBI for espionage. They closed the case when they mistakenly thought he had left the country. Mr. Danchenko's status in connection with that espionage matter was never resolved by the Bureau. The Bureau, in fact, never opened it.
And he was the source for much of the Steele dossier.
He said that he was responsible for 80% of the intelligence in the dossier.
And who
50% of the
commissioned the Steele dossier?
The Steele dossier was done by Fusion GPS, who was hired by Perkins Coie, who represented the Clinton campaign. And
So what role did the Clinton campaign play in this hoax?
I'm sorry, did they?
What role did the Clinton campaign play in this hoax?
The Clinton campaign funded the work, the opposition research that was done by Fusion GPS, and GPS paid Mr. Steele for the dossier.
And who in the Clinton campaign approved that relationship?
Well, we lay some of that out in the report. I think it was Mr. Elias, who was general counsel to the campaign, who engaged the services of Fusion GPS.
Mr. Jordan referenced the Clinton plan intelligence. Exactly what was the Clinton plan?
Based on declassified documents in the public record, there was intelligence information that was received at virtually the same time that the information came from the Australians, I mean, within a day or two. That intelligence included information that there was a purported plan designed by one of Mrs. Clinton's foreign policy advisors to create a scandal tying Donald Trump to the Russians. That's the essence of the intelligence as contained in the declassified information.
Did the president receive this intelligence?
On August 3rd of 2016, then Director Brennan had briefed the president, vice president, director of national intelligence, the FBI, the attorney general, and others.
When you say the FBI, you mean Mr. Comey?
He had, on August 3rd, it was conducted at the White House. It was Director Comey himself.
So Mr. Comey knew about this. President Obama knew about this. Vice President Biden knew about this. But it wasn't provided to the agents on the case or provided to the secret FISA court. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Why wasn't it?
We can tell you what the facts are. People can draw their own conclusions from that.
About the Papadopoulos comments at the bar that were used as justification for this whole thing, what would the FBI have learned had it looked into this information honestly?
If before opening Crossfire Hurricane, they had checked their own files and communicated with other intelligence agencies and the like, they would have found that there was nothing at that time in their files that would corroborate the information, the suggestion of a suggestion that the Russians might provide some kind of assistance. There's nothing in their files that would corroborate that.
The Steele dossier was entered in the congressional record. Was it true?
I'm sorry, the Steele
The
dossier.
Steele dossier was entered into our congressional record. Was it true?
There is not a single substantive piece of information in the dossier that has ever been corroborated by the FBI or, to my knowledge, anyone else.
You mentioned that the FISA court criticized the misleading and false information that was used to request the FISA warrants, but did the FISA court hold anyone in contempt for that?
Not to my knowledge.
Did they apply any sanctions to anyone responsible for that?
Not to my knowledge.
Did they even yell at anybody?
They issued an appropriately harsh memo talking about what the expectation is when a document is submitted to that court, that it be truthful and accurate and complete. And that was the expectation, is the expectation.
Gentleman yields back. Chair now recognizes the gentlelady from Washington.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Durham, thank you for being here today to speak with us about the report you produced looking at the FBI's investigation into Russian interference in the 2016 election. Your report took 4 years and over $6.5 million in taxpayer dollars to produce. Mr. Durham, how many cases did you bring to trial during your time investigating the 2016 election?
I'm sorry, you just missed part of that because
How many cases did you bring to trial?
Two.
Two. And in how many of those 2 cases did the juries vote to convict?
Neither one.
Neither one. Neither jury voted to convict the gentleman that you prosecuted. And in fact, in one case, the trial judge threw out one of your charges because the claim that you were charging as false was, as he put it, literally true. Mr. Durham, I think you were given an impossible task by Attorney General Bill Barr. He asked you to figure out how to make Donald Trump's Spygate claims true. But you couldn't do that because you quickly realized that the claims were false. And so you set about, as many Republicans on cable news do, trying to find a way to blame Hillary Clinton for Donald Trump's woes. Mr. Durham, do you know how many people Special Counsel Mueller indicted or obtained guilty pleas from?
They indicted or charged a number of people. I think
It was 34. It was 34 people and 3 companies. Do you know how many of those indictments were of individuals who were acquitted in court?
I don't know that anybody was acquitted.
That's right. The answer is none. So I think the difference between your investigation and Mr. Mueller's was that Mr. Mueller actually found actual evidence of a crime. We know that Russia did attempt to interfere in the 2016 election. We know that Russia did hack into the DNC email server, and Mr. Mueller's prosecutions reflected that reality, such as the case of 12 Russian military intelligence officers who he charged with crimes related to the hacking and the leaking of leading Democrats' emails in 2016. Similarly, Mr. Mueller found repeated instances of Trump campaign associates lying when asked about their interactions with Russian interests. And as a result of Mr. Mueller's investigation, George Papadopoulos pleaded guilty in October of 2017 to making false statements to the FBI. Trump campaign aide Rick Gates pleaded guilty to 1 false statements charge and 1 conspiracy charge. Trump National Security Advisor Michael Flynn pleaded guilty to making false statements to the FBI. And in November of 2019, Trump advisor Roger Stone was convicted on 7 counts, including lying to the House Intelligence Committee and tampering with a witness. Again, Mr. Mueller indicted or got guilty pleas from 34 people and 3 companies. Mr. Durham, you're a career prosecutor, correct?
That's correct.
And you started working as a state prosecutor in 1977, and you joined the Justice Department in 1982. Yes or no, prosecutors prioritize bringing cases to court that have a high likelihood of winning?
I would not say that that's the standard, no.
So you don't think that to call an investigation successful, you should at least reveal some new information? Most of your report, Mr. Durham, is a rehashing of old news, including process-related concerns that the FBI had already addressed. In fact, that's why you said you were not recommending any further changes to FBI policies or procedures. So at the very least, I would think that you would need to win some of the cases on their merits. But that's not what happened. And that's not what MAGA Republicans are looking for. Chairman Jordan seems to be looking for any excuse to discredit law enforcement and DOJ, who are finally holding Donald Trump accountable for his serious violations of the law. Violations, by the way, that Donald Trump just admitted to last night on Fox News. Americans will see through this facade. And I wanted to ask Mr. Schiff if he wants my additional 40 seconds of time. If so, I yield.
Thank you. I just want to follow up on my question before. Nora Danahy is a very well-respected member of your team. Why did she resign?
I'm sorry?
Nora Danahy was a very well-respected member of your team. Why did she resign?
Yeah, that's not part of the report, and I'm not going to discuss internal matters.
Did she resign over disagreement she had with you about how you're handling the investigation?
It's not part of the report. I'm not going to discuss it.
It's
I
not
have
part of the report,
highest
but
regard for Ms. Danahy.
But you know the answer, Mr. Durham. Why won't you tell us?
I think
Because that's not part of the report, that's not part of the mission, and I'm not going to discuss internal discussions. I can tell you this, that with respect to every major decision that was made by our team, every agent and every lawyer had full voice in expressing their opinions, and we proceeded accordingly, with me making the final
Some voted
decision.
with their feet to leave your office.
time of the gentlelady has expired.
I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Texas is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. That's not part of the report. It is a lot of what I've heard from my colleagues on the other side of the aisle. One of my colleagues from California said, I don't know what we're doing here. And what we're doing here is going through this very damning report. The FBI has failed many times over the years that you investigated them. I'd like to ask, did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without speaking to the people who provided the information?
Yes,
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane on a Sunday, only 3 days after reviewing the information?
yes,
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without any significant review of its own intelligence database?
yes,
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without interviewing the essential witnesses?
yes,
Did the FBI open Crossfire Hurricane without using any of the standard analytical tools typically employed in evaluating intelligence?
yes.
Did the FBI consider the possibility that it was the target?
It didn't appear so to me from the evidence.
And so I'm curious if you could tell me, because I'm not a prosecutor, some of my colleagues here are, but the average American is not. Can you tell us why and under what motivation would a prosecutorial agency act in such a way where it willfully ignores multiple instances of exculpatory evidence throughout the course of its investigation? Because I just don't understand that.
That, in my experience, that is not the norm. That's not how the FBI performs. In this particular case, as is reflected in the report, there appear to be persons in the FBI who were central to opening the investigation that had rather strong views concerning then candidate Trump.
And we've heard in your report that you reference confirmation bias. And a lot of times, or sometimes, we see that the investigators, perhaps the FBI investigators, they have a confirmation bias because they want a guilty outcome. They want to find the suspect guilty. But we did not see that to be the case for Hillary Clinton. So it makes me think that based on the investigation into the conduct and the continuous disregard for duty, there was obviously a special motivation to find this suspect, Donald Trump and his campaign, guilty above anyone else. Would you agree?
I can speak to what the facts show, as documented in the report. Again, people draw their reasonable inferences, conclusions from those facts with an honest reading of the report.
If either you or someone on your team willfully ignored exculpatory evidence, refused to interview key witnesses, favored one suspect over another, or did any or all of the things that the FBI did during Crossfire Hurricane, would you face repercussions?
There ought to be repercussions. If that ever happened in connection with an agent that I was working with and I knew about it, the first thing—
How to escape the heat if you don't have an air conditioner. This only takes 5 minutes. Tired of hot—
He was a very well-respected.
Sure that that agent never worked with me again.
I appreciate that. I also appreciate your
Gentleman yields
remarks
back,
earlier
gentleman.
in your open testimony, where you said, "My colleagues and I carried out our work in good faith, with integrity, in the spirit of following the facts wherever they lead, without fear or favor." I believe you did that. I'm disappointed in some of my colleagues that have said disparaging remarks about you. I've seen very few that actually talk about your report. They want to talk about everything else, which tells me you're onto something. I'd also yield the balance of my time to the chairman.
I appreciate the gentleman for yielding. So Dan Chinko is the primary subsource. A few years before he does this work, he was investigated by the FBI for espionage. Is that right, Mr. Durham?
Correct.
And that case was halted because the FBI thought he left the country, right?
Correct.
Had he left the country?
No.
Where was he living?
He remained living in the place that he was living when they opened the investigation.
Right here in D.C., right?
Yeah.
He hadn't left anywhere. He's right here in D.C. and we're going to stop this. And then they go hire him, use the tax money of the people I get the privilege of representing to pay this guy who they obviously knew was a Russian spy. They hire him, who's the source of all the false information. Is that true?
They paid him, they hired him and they paid him.
Couple $100,000 if I recall, right?
It's over $200,000.
Yeah, and then this guy's hanging out with Dolan, Charles Dolan, who's a buddy of the Clintons, who's also a source for the false dossier that was used to spy on an American citizen. He's hanging out with Dolan. In fact, don't they meet on a park bench somewhere in Arlington, Virginia on New Year's Day?
New Year's Day, middle of the
I mean,
day.
this is straight out of the movies, right? And the FBI says, but we're not going to talk to Charles Dolan. I mean, this is two of the dumbest things I've ever heard of. They won't talk to, they pay a guy who's a Russian spy, who's the source of the dossier. The other source of the dossier is Charles Dolan, who meets with that guy on a park bench in Arlington, and they don't want to interview him. I mean, you can't make this stuff up, but that's what Comey's FBI did. And they're still doing this kind of baloney because Mr. D'Antuono told us so, running operations, running investigations out of headquarters instead of assigning a U.S. attorney, a job you did for a long time and did very well. That is a huge problem. And your report, that's why your report's valuable. Gentlemen, I yield back to the gentleman who was out of time, and we now recognize the gentleman from, Mr. Cray. I'm sorry, right here. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized for 5.
Thank you. And thank you for coming to testify today. I know it's not a comfortable experience, obviously. And clearly the questions have exposed that we have many areas of disagreement across the aisle, but I am relieved that we have no disagreement about one of the fundamental conclusions of your report, that it was incumbent upon the FBI to open some form of investigation when presented with evidence that a presidential candidate and his associates are either coordinating campaign efforts with a hostile nation or being manipulated by such a hostile nation. And that is a fundamental conclusion, right? Some form of investigation was necessary.
Right. I mean, the FBI, when they receive information, disinformation, other information, they almost always have some obligation to assess that information.
Sure.
That's what the assessment is about.
Sure. So we've established over the course of questions that the current Attorney General Merrick Garland, allowed you to run your investigation, I think you said, independently and without interference, right?
That's correct.
And you've talked about the thoroughness of your investigation as you performed it over the course of 4.5 years, $6.5 million, hundreds of FBI agents, 6 million pages of documents, not hundreds of FBI agents, hundreds of personnel working with you.
That would not be accurate, but
Okay. Well, you also had the benefit of prior investigations, including the Mueller report.
correct.
The 2019 Department of Justice Office of Inspector General's report, which concurred with you that there was an obligation to investigate, right?
Yes.
Although it disagreed with you about precisely the form, correct?
I think it's more than form, but we had disagreement in that regard.
And there was also a 2020 Senate Select Committee report on intelligence run by Senator Rubio that affirmed that Russia, in fact, had sought to interfere in our elections to benefit the Trump campaign, correct?
The report, I don't remember if Senator Rubio was the chair at the time or not.
Okay,
I
but there
don't think he was.
Okay. So with all of that, you and Attorney General Barr had both been appointed by President Trump, right?
I'm sorry, can you just repeat that one again?
You and Attorney General Barr had both been appointed to serve at that time by President Trump, correct?
I had been nominated by President Trump, and I believe that Mr. Barr was nominated to be Attorney General by Mr. Trump.
Okay. And the AG Barr appointed you to be special counsel, right?
He appointed me as special counsel, yes.
Okay. But in contrast to the independence and lack of interference, which you have noted on multiple occasions that has been performed by Merrick Garland, AG Barr had a very active role in your investigation. And I just wanted to mention a couple instances. First of all, shortly after your appointment, you and AG Barr both traveled overseas and met with Italian officials who provided some allegations with respect to criminal activity by the former president, correct?
We traveled well, this is outside the reports. I'm not sure that I'm authorized to talk about it, but we went to Italy to try to pursue leads involving a particular mysterious professor.
Okay. So you don't mention in your report those allegations of misconduct concerning the former president, correct? It's not in your report. You didn't include that information in your report, right?
Okay. Which information?
About your trip to Italy with AG Barr?
No, I don't
Okay.
know why I would have included
And
that in a report.
the day the Inspector General's report was published, you issued a press release saying that you didn't agree with some of his conclusions. Did AG Barr ask you to issue that press release?
Absolutely not.
Okay, who did?
I made that decision. Do you want to know why or no?
Actually, I wanted to know first, can you identify any other occasion which a special counsel has released a press statement questioning another special counsel or Inspector General's report? Can you name one?
Yeah, I don't know of any.
Okay.
They may have, but I don't know about it.
Okay, so did you communicate with AG Barr about your press statement before his was released the same day, or was that just a fantastic coincidence?
Did I communicate with Attorney General Barr about what?
About your press release questioning the IG's report.
I told Attorney General Barr, I didn't ask his permission. I told him I was going to do it.
Okay. One more question. There's been mention of the resignation of one of your colleagues, Nora Danahy, in the fall of 2020. Isn't it true that she resigned in protest concerning pressure by AG Barr for you to deliver an interim report or other results before the 2020 presidential election?
You'd have to ask Ms. Danahy that. I'm not going to discuss the internal discussions in our group.
Or we could Google it. Thank you. I yield back.
It's a pretty good source of information.
Sure is. The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from Oregon is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Durham, for being here today and for your patience with us. I want to talk about that space between law and policy, I guess, if you will. And I want to go back to, I think I got your words written down during your opening statement where you said there were troubling violations of law and policy. Do I have that right?
Yes, sir.
And so the assertion has been that perhaps there should have been more indictments, more people brought before the court for their actions. But it appears to me that you you tried that and perhaps encountered, I haven't looked at the two trials that turned out not to reach convictions, but was it a situation where there was something wrong, but it didn't rise to the level of a crime? Is that what was going on in that space?
You conduct these investigations. We conducted this investigation, done other public corruption investigations, organized crime investigations, and when there's sufficient evidence that you believe that the evidence is sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, that case should be brought. There may be evidence that you have, but you're not confident that it would be sufficient to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt and sustain that case on appeal, and you don't bring the action. And here there was conduct, some of which was misconduct. There's conduct that was probably criminal, but you couldn't prove it. And that's true here. It appears in other instances as well.
Right, and I think the phrase political bias or confirmation bias has been used a number of times. Is that a crime?
Confirmation bias is not a crime. It's part of our human condition, I suppose.
Yes, and it's so you may well have found, and it sounds like you did, troubling violations of law and policy, which perhaps would not lead to and did not, of course, convictions, but it doesn't make it any less wrong when we have our law enforcement agencies engaging in this kind of conduct. And I think that's why you call it troubling. Do I have that right?
You have that right.
And the question, I suppose, is what can we do about this situation looking forward? If it's not a crime, but we know it's wrong, what should we be doing? And I think you made some suggestions. Can you recite those for us? And you spent 4 years in this space, and there's obviously things going wrong that we can't convict people for, or at least it doesn't rise to the level that will warrant that approach. What should we be doing?
Yeah, I mean, the real difficulty, in my view, is trying to figure out how to hold people accountable for their conduct. And it's not a simple problem to solve. In the context of the FISA situation, for example, or maybe it would be the case in any instance in which there's what's referred to in the Bureau as a sensitive investigative matter, a SIM, that there are additional rules that apply there. Maybe it's come time where if an agent is going to sign a FISA application in a sensitive investigative matter, that they not only understand that they're signing under the penalties of perjury, but if the Bureau determines that they intentionally misstated anything, that their employment will be terminated. I mean, there's real teeth in when somebody signs an affidavit, swears to something before a judicial officer, there are consequences if that is untrue. There are criminal penalties, but there sure as heck got to be other penalties as well. I mean, there are things like that. In these sensitive cases, I mean, this is not a normal case. This is a presidential election and it affected the nation. Maybe they ought to instill practice, for example, of red teaming, which we tried to do to an extent in our investigation, which is you have a group of people who take the opposite side to make the arguments and try to point out either where the weaknesses are or where additional evidence needs to be developed. It may be that the Bureau would benefit, as I said in the report, from having something of an ombudsman who would look at FISA applications or look at the investigative effort being undertaken in these sensitive investigative matters, who looks at how the investigation is progressing and whether or not, in that person's estimation, the investigation is being done independently and in a disciplined way. There are those kinds of things, but ultimately, I don't know how you hold people responsible absent their integrity and that kind of overview or review of what the investigation is doing.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Colorado is recognized. I thank the chairman. Mr. Durham, thank you for testifying today. Thank you for your service to
a real pleasure.
Our country. Well, we appreciate your service to our country, to the Department of Justice. I've read your report, as I suspect most of the members of the committee have, and appreciated your work. I want to talk a bit about your interactions with Maine Justice, with the Department of Justice, in particular with Attorney General Garland. Did Attorney General Garland permit your inquiry to proceed independently?
Yes.
Did Attorney General Garland interfere with your inquiry, your investigation in any way?
No.
Did Attorney General Garland attempt to prevent or stop you or your team from taking any investigative step that you deemed necessary?
He did not.
Did Attorney General Garland provide support to your efforts?
In terms of occasionally we would need some additional personnel. In a couple of instances, we had a person that was detailed from Maine Justice. Yes, so in that respect, yes.
Did Attorney General Garland decline to implement any of the recommendations that you've made?
I don't know that.
The letter, the report, I believe it's on page 3 of your report, you say, and I'll quote, "After the inauguration of President Biden, Attorney General Garland met with the Office of the Special Counsel. The office very much appreciates the support consistent with his testimony," referring to Attorney General Garland, "during his confirmation hearings that the Attorney General has provided to our efforts and the department's willingness to allow us to operate independently," end quote. You stand by that, I suspect.
I do.
Correct. Sounds like the Department of Justice and the Attorney General were supportive of your efforts, did not interfere in any way with the work that you did over the course of the last several years. There are some folks here in Congress, some colleagues of mine on the other side of the aisle, who have talked about or indicated their desire to defund the Department of Justice. Do you believe the Department of Justice should be defunded?
I don't believe these discussions about defunding the police make any sense at all for the security of the nation, and I don't think defunding cornerstone law enforcement entities make a whole lot of sense. Maybe more oversight, but defunding in cities and streets and so forth, no, that doesn't make sense to me. But I've only been at this for 40 years.
Sure. Well, and as I said, I am grateful to your service and for your service rather, and I guess I just want to put a finer point on it because I guess I didn't hear that in your answer. You said a cornerstone of law enforcement. I take that you mean the Department of Justice. The Department of Justice obviously should not be defunded, right? You've committed your career to the Department of Justice. You were a former U.S. attorney, a former acting U.S. attorney, 35 years as an assistant U.S. attorney. You have a decorated record of service to the department. I'm hoping you're willing to say on the record clearly that you don't believe the department should be defunded.
I don't believe the Department of Justice or the FBI should be defunded. I think there ought to be some changes and the like, but defunded, no.
Thank you. And I appreciate your candor. And I agree with you. With respect to the Office of the Special Counsel, of course, you've concluded your service. As you know, there are different special counsels that are appointed from time to time. You've served in that capacity multiple times yourselves. There is discussion of defunding special counsels. Do you support more broadly the principle of defunding the Office of the Special Counsel?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would have to know the particulars of what the discussion is, but I mean, the general notion that you would establish special counsel office, the special counsel is doing an investigation, then you're going to defund it would not make sense to me.
Yeah, I agree. And just to put a finer point on this, you served as special counsel for a period of years. During the course of your investigation, for the bulk of that time, Democrats were in control of the United States House of Representatives. There was no effort that I'm aware of to defund your office. And I assume that you would have construed that if someone had made an effort to defund the Office of Special Counsel, your office, as you were undertaking your investigation, as political interference, to the extent that that was being done to try to impair or impinge on your investigation. Is that an accurate statement?
Yeah, I mean, if it were our office, our team, I guess I'd have to know the basis of that to see if I thought it was, political or,
let's say it's because people
spending too much money.
Sure. Let's say it's because people disagreed with the work that you were doing. They didn't like your investigation. They disagreed fundamentally.
Conspiracy or collusion.
Mr. Durham, is that what you call sobering? Would that be sobering to you?
It's sobering to me in connection with this investigation is the FBI, the people who were involved in the Crossfire Hurricane investigation, ignoring exculpatory information, discarding information that was inconsistent with the investigative narrative, with using information, in this instance from the Steele dossier, to establish probable cause to electronically surveil a United States citizen who happened to be a Naval Academy graduate. Those things are sobering to me.
Oh, I would agree with that. Did the FBI ever fail to take or delay taking action in an investigation involving Hillary Clinton?
That wasn't, well, there's a portion of the report that relates to the disparate treatment. So did the FBI delay? There are 3 instances that are identified in the report where the FBI's investigative efforts were considered considerably more disciplined than was the case with respect to Mr. Trump.
More discipline, you mean bias? And let me move on, Mr. Durham. I don't want to run out of time. Did the FBI give the Clinton campaign a defensive briefing?
They gave, in a particular manner, the FBI gave Mrs. Clinton's legal representatives a debriefing of a defensive nature, yes.
Why wasn't the same done for the Trump campaign and President Trump?
We explored that during the course of the investigation. What we learned set out in the report, it would appear from at least what we were told, that very little thought went into whether they should give anybody in the Trump campaign a defensive briefing, and they didn't do
A lot of thought went into giving Hillary Clinton's campaign a defensive briefing, apparently, but not President Trump.
In one instance, I think you're referring to the submission of a FISA application in that matter against the foreign interest was premised on them giving a defensive briefing to Mrs. Clinton and some other political.
Mr. Durham, is it safe to say that the Clinton campaign colluded with the Russians to accuse Donald Trump of colluding with the Russians?
I could not phrase it that way. I could say is that the Clinton campaign funded the information that showed up in the dossier. The Clinton campaign funded the information that was put together concerning an alleged secret communications channel between Trump and Alpha Bank, which was presented to the FBI through Mr. Sussman. So yeah, there are those things that definitely occurred, and the evidence establishes that.
Thank you, Mr. Durham. I appreciate your service. I'll yield back to the chairman.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Durham, Carter Page is an American citizen who Naval Academy grad, served our country. Why not just talk to him before you spy on him?
In this instance, I mean, I don't know if people looked at this in the report. There was a particular piece of information that had been given to Michael Isikoff and appeared in a Yahoo News article on September 23rd, in which Mr. Isikoff lays out what he's obviously been told, and it's clearly the information from Steele. But it also included a statement that a senior law enforcement official confirmed that Carter Page was on the radar screen. That matter was never referred for investigation as to who leaked that. This is an investigation that's supposed to be closely held, confidential, sensitive investigative matter, and that's never referred to, nobody ever looked at. Who's the senior law enforcement officer who gave the information to Michael Isikoff that Carter Page was on their radar screen? That's not number one.
Who do you think it was?
Mr. Chairman, the time is well expired. The witness could answer the question. You can't answer ask another one.
I appreciate the ranking member for pointing that fact out.
Okay, I'm not sure. Am I supposed to answer or not? Am I done?
I'll let you answer.
Oh, okay. So then, with respect to Carter Page, within 2 days of that article, wrote a letter to Director Comey saying, I didn't do the things that are suggested. I didn't meet with these people. I'm willing to sit down and talk to the FBI, tell me when and where, essentially.
He offered to be interviewed. The gentlelady from Texas is recognized for unanimous consent.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Let me submit into the record an article dated 6/18/23. After years of political hype, the Durham inquiry failed to deliver. As unanimous consent. And then as unanimous consent to place into the record this language from a letter directed to Mr. Durham on May 15, 2023. The Federal Bureau of Investigation appreciates the special counsel's independent review. We also appreciate your acknowledgement of the extensive cooperation the FBI provided to your team throughout the review, including production of nearly 7 million pages of documents, assignment of full-time FBI special agents to assist in your fact-finding process, and provision of FBI technical expertise.
Without objection.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentlelady yields back. The gentlelady from Pennsylvania is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Special Counsel Durham, for being here today. As has been noted, it's been 4 years and $6.5 million of an investigation. And the Durham report makes no new recommendations to change FBI policy or procedure. It does not conclude that the Crossfire Hurricane investigation should not have been opened, and it even acknowledges that the Clinton campaign did nothing worthy of prosecution. Sadly, the Durham report dredges up allegations from unsuccessful prosecutions, including claims that have been rejected by judge and jury. The flaws of the Durham process were so troubling that some aides resigned in protest. I did Google and in fact read the news articles around the resignation of Nora Donahue, that it is reported that she resigned because of pressure on you and the special counsel group to produce a report or an interim report prior to the presidential election. You can't comment on Nora Donahue's personnel matter. Were you ever encouraged, persuaded, pressured to issue an interim or report prior to the presidential election?
You see, without hesitation, I was not pressured into doing anything.
Was it suggested to you?
It was not suggested to me.
And yet it might have been suggested to someone who worked under you, separate from you.
I don't believe so.
Okay. Mr. Durham, would it have been a dereliction of duty if the FBI sat on its hands and did not investigate with the information they had in front of them? Isn't it true?
I'm sure the Bureau has an obligation to investigate. They should investigate information that they receive from the public or otherwise. And generally speaking, yeah, they have an obligation to look at and assess information.
And in this case, they had an affirmative duty to investigate. Would you agree?
They had an affirmative duty to assess the information they had gotten from the Australian diplomats.
Which would be an investigation. You were assigned to investigate that investigation. Mr. Durham, when did you first meet with Attorney General Barr about a potential investigation into the Mueller investigation?
You know, I was appointed in May of 2019. I had met Attorney General Barr after, not in connection with these matters, but I think I initially met the Attorney General when I became the U.S. Attorney for Connecticut.
Let me just put the calendar together. It was on March 22nd that the Mueller report was submitted to Attorney General Barr. Would you agree with that?
That's March 22nd.
And according to public records, you met with Attorney General Barr on March 25th, 3 days later.
Okay.
And on March 24th, Attorney General Barr released his so-called summary document of a 448-page report, which blatantly mischaracterized the findings in the Mueller report. Would you agree with that?
No.
Did you discuss the Mueller report during your meeting with Mr. Barr on March 25th?
I don't believe so. I think that
the timing was 3 days after he received the report, and you don't think in your meeting you talked about the Mueller report?
I don't think that was. I think it was when I was meeting the Attorney General because I had become the U.S. Attorney in Connecticut in mid to late February.
Maybe you could search your memory and get back to us on that. It's troubling to me because it is clear you were brought in by Attorney General Barr the same week the Mueller report was released and the day after his misleading letter, which hung out there for 25 days before the public got our hands and our eyes on the redacted report. You were hired to investigate the investigators. 1 week after you met with Mr. Barr on April 13th, Attorney General Barr's counselor, Seth DeCharme, emailed you offering assistance on behalf of Barr, saying, quote, John, the AG has made me aware of the redacted material you're working with him on, and he asked me to provide you with my support and assistance. Is that true?
I think that's correct.
Okay.
I don't remember the date, but that sounds right.
And that's only April. So I'm wondering if you weren't yet put into this field. Donald Trump was very vocal on Twitter, as he always has been, about his belief that the Mueller investigation should never have been taken. Are you aware of his tweets?
I know that the former president was a tweeter, yes.
He was a tweeter. Some Republicans on this committee believed that part of your purpose was to exonerate Mr. Donald Trump. I want to take you back to your opening statement. It's at paragraph 4. As you know, Mr. Durham, you said this morning, if repeated or left unaddressed, these issues could result in significant national security risks and further erode public faith in our justice system. We now sit with a former president indicted 37 counts of around the documents, the classified documents that he took, he held, he moved, he concealed, he lied about, he showed to other people, 37 counts. If repeated or left unaddressed, these issues could result in significant national security risks and further erode public faith in our justice system. I thank you for your service, for pointing out what really matters when we have a very dangerous former president and criminal indictments to come. A mess of Mr. Trump's own making. I am baffled by this committee's lifting up of a corrupt
The gentlelady has
president.
expired.
And I thank you for indulging me just as you indulge yourself. Thank you.
God bless you. That's right.
God bless
Full
you.
opportunity. Mr. Durham, if you can go one more
Do
round.
this every day?
Yeah. Well, this is relatively calm to some hearings and we have, Mr. If you can go one more, then we'll give you a break, but we'll recognize the gentleman from California and we'll give you a quick break, maybe 5-10 minutes, and we'll come back and finish. But the gentleman from California is recognized for 5.
Mr. Durham, several people today, including Ranking Member Madler and 3 representatives from California, Mr. Schiff, Mr. Swalwell, and Mr. Liu, have attacked you. Ranking Member Nadler called your report a political exercise with ethical ambiguity. Mr. Liu called you a partisan hack. However, it seems that they're taking issue not so much with the conclusions of your report as those of Mr. Mueller's report, which concluded that the investigation did not establish that members of the Trump campaign conspired or coordinated with the Russian government in its election interference activities. That conclusion directly contradicted statements made on the record by those representatives. For example, Mr. Schiff in 2017-2018 made statements such as, the Russians offered help, the campaign accepted help, the Russians gave help, and the president made full use of that help, and that is pretty damning. He also said there's clear evidence on the issue of collusion. He said, I think there's plenty of evidence of collusion or conspiracy in plain sight. Mr. Durham,
The gentleman yield?
are those statements supported by the conclusions of the Mueller
The
report?
gentleman yield?
No. Mr. Durham, are those statements supported by the Mueller report?
I don't believe so.
Mr. Nadler stated, it's clear that the campaign concluded and there's a lot of evidence of that. The question is, was the president involved? Mr. Nadler also said there was obviously a lot of collusion. Mr. Durham, were those statements supported by the Mueller report?
I don't believe they are supported by the Mueller report.
Mr. Liu stated in a press release in March of 2017, the bombshell revelation that U.S. officials have information that suggests Trump associates may have colluded with the Russians means we must pause the entire Trump agenda. We may have an illegitimate president of the United States currently occupying the White House. Mr. Durham, did the Mueller report establish that we had an illegitimate president occupying the White House?
Not to my knowledge.
Mr. Swalwell stated in 2018, in our investigation, we saw strong evidence of collusion. Did the Mueller report support that there was strong evidence of collusion?
Not to my knowledge.
Even here today, we had Mr. Schiff raise questions about your public statement during the investigation, saying this somehow violated a DOJ policy. However, Mr. Mueller himself made a public statement in January of 2019. This is an article from CNN, headline, Mueller's office disputes BuzzFeed report that Trump directed Michael Cohen to lie to Congress. So whatever policy there might exist in the DOJ with respect to public statements by special counsels, it would seem that you and Mr. Mueller would be on equal footing with respect to it. Is that correct?
It would seem so.
Mr. Nadler, Ranking Member Nadler also suggested that we're only here today because of the recent indictments of President Trump. However, you received your assignment as special counsel in 2019. Is that correct?
That's correct. 2020, the special counsels in 2020.
In 2020. And was that before or after the events alleged in the recent indictments by the president?
That was before.
And is it customary for a special counsel to come testify in Congress upon the issuance of the report?
This is my first experience of this sort of thing. So I know that Director Mueller had occasion to testify before Congress, so I guess this is not unique.
So it's pretty likely you would have been here whether or not the president had been recently indicted.
Yes.
Contrary to Ranking Member Nadler's statement. I want to quote from you a part of your report where you say, there are reasons why in examining politically charged and high-profile issues, the office must exercise and has exercised special care. One of those statements you said is that even when prosecutors believe that they can obtain a conviction, there are some instances in which it may not be advisable to expend government time and resources on a criminal prosecution, particularly where it could create the appearance, even if unfounded, that the government is seeking to criminalize the behavior of political opponents or punish the activities of a specific political party or campaign. Could you just expound on that a little bit, this idea that there are prudential considerations that may counsel against prosecution, even if there has been some technical violation of a statute?
Sure. The standard principles of federal prosecution include, kind of as a bedrock, that you ought not to bring a prosecution unless you believe in good faith that there's sufficient evidence to prove a case beyond a reasonable doubt, the jury will convict, and that a conviction can be sustained on appeal. There may be those instances in which you're pretty well convinced that a crime was committed and can identify the person who committed it, but you can't in good faith say a jury is likely to convict in this case. We believe that a jury will convict and that we can sustain it on appeal. Those are the principles that we tried to apply here, that we followed here. They're the same principles I've followed for 40 years as a federal prosecutor.
What are you referring to when you say that there might be additional considerations involving the perception that you're criminalizing the behavior of political opponents?
Yeah, I mean, these are difficult things. For example, taking this case, I think all the members of the committee have had access to, whether they took advantage or not, I don't know, but we filed a classified appendix here, right? So there are some prosecutions where it may very well be that it looks like, and you think you can prove the crime beyond a reasonable doubt, but because of the classified nature of much of your evidence, it's never going to see the light of day. So that might preclude a prosecution. Things of that sort come up that are part of the prudential judgment that a prosecutor has to make in these matters.
I yield back. Thank you.
The gentleman yields back. We'll take a short break, short recess. If we can come back in 10 minutes, so at 12:05, we'll come back. Give everyone a short break before we resume.
Going on there. All right, sorry about that. They got me a couple times. I can't remember what that guy's name was. My headphones are on. Can you guys hear me? Give me a thumbs up if you can hear me. I only need one thumbs up if you can. I can check it on mine. I have mine up. All right, sorry about that. Okay, so I do have sound. All right. Yeah, it's one guy on there. Every time he gets on there, he'd say great show or whatever, and then he'd say watch your six. Next thing I know, I'm getting zapped. Now, if that's him, I mean, is it him? I don't know, but it seemed like it's ironic that the moment he gets on there, that happens. Now, I guess the conversation in the chat was getting a little bit too hot. I don't know, and I don't care. This will be my last live. Actually, I'm probably going to do like just a little clip or something like that to direct people to my Rumble stuff. So if you get an alert to come to you on YouTube to get on there, it's going to direct you to Rumble, where I'm going to go live there, and then I'm going to look into a couple of other ones that I like, that I follow, and going to. I just didn't want to spend the extra money. But it looks like I'm going to have to, because this is getting frustrated. Because I want to go back live. I want to get back hot again. I've been shorting you people of all of this information that I have. But I told you I was going to queue up. Where is it? I was going to queue up this one. Let me open it up. Hold on. Okay, and I want you to pay attention to what Adam Schiff says. Well, I'm gonna let it run because he's sticking his foot in his mouth. Then as soon as he finishes, I'm gonna show you some evidence real quick. All right, so check this out real quick.
The Mueller investigation revealed that Russia interfered in the 2016 election in sweeping and systemic fashion, correct?
That's correct.
And Russia did so through a social media campaign that favored Donald Trump and disparaged Hillary Clinton, correct?
The report says, yes.
And Mueller found that a Russian intelligence service hacked computers associated with the Clinton campaign and then released the stolen documents publicly. Is that right?
That report speaks for itself as well.
Mueller also reported that though he could not establish the crime of conspiracy beyond a reasonable doubt, he also said, quote, a statement that the investigation did not establish certain facts does not mean there was no evidence of those facts. That also appears in the report, doesn't it?
There's language to that effect, yes.
In fact, you cited that very statement in your own report, did you not? As a way of distinguishing between proof beyond a reasonable doubt and evidence that falls short of proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Correct.
As an illustration of this, both Mueller and congressional investigations found that Trump's campaign chairman, Paul Manafort, was secretly meeting with an operative linked to Russian intelligence named Konstantin Kilimnik, correct?
That's my understanding, yes.
And that Manafort, while chairman of the Trump campaign, gave that Russian intelligence operative the campaign's internal polling data, correct?
That's what I've read in the news, yes.
And that Manafort provided this information to Russian intelligence while Russian intelligence was engaged in that social media campaign and the release of stolen documents to help the Trump campaign, correct?
You may be getting beyond depth of my knowledge, but
well, let me say very simply, while Manafort, the campaign chairman for Donald Trump, was giving this Russian intelligence officer internal campaign polling data, Russian intelligence was helping the Trump campaign, weren't they?
I don't know that.
You really don't know those very basic facts of the investigation?
I know the general facts, yes. Do I know that particular fact myself? No. I mean, I know that I've read that in the media.
Are you aware, Mr. Durham, that Mueller and congressional
Watch this
investigations
comeback.
also revealed that Don Jr. was informed that a Russian official was offering the Trump campaign, quote, very high level and sensitive information, unquote, that would be incriminating if Hillary Clinton was part of, quote, Russia and its government support of Mr. Trump? You aware of that?
Sure, people get phone calls all the time from individuals who claim to have information like that.
Really, the son of a presidential candidate gets calls all the time from foreign government offering dirt on their opponent? Is that what you're saying?
I don't think this is unique in your experience.
So you have other instances of the Russian government offering dirt on a presidential candidate to the presidential candidate's son. Is that what you're saying?
Could you repeat the question?
You said that it's not uncommon to get offers of help from a hostile foreign government in a presidential campaign directed at the president's son.
I hope y'all heard that. That was a comeback. But another thing he says is coming up. I actually jumped out of it because it wouldn't close. But let me see. It was probably about right here.
Of the year. So you think it's perfectly appropriate or maybe just ill-advised for a presidential campaign to secretly meet with a Russian delegation to get dirt on their opponent? You would merely say that's inadvisable?
Yeah, if you're asking me would I do it, I hope I wouldn't do it, but it was not illegal. It was stupid, foolish, ill-advised.
Well, it is illegal to conspire to get incriminating opposition research from a hostile government that is of financial value to a campaign. Wouldn't that violate campaign laws?
I don't know all those facts to be true.
Okay, now you got that, right? All righty. You got that. So I pull this up. Okay. I pull this up right here. The FEC finds Hillary Clinton's campaign and DNC Trump over Trump Russia dossier research. Basically, he said it's illegal to have opposition research on people, right? This is it. Check it out. Democratic National Committee earlier this month for not properly disclosing the money they spent on a controversial opposition research that led to the infamous Trump Russia dossier. Now, what that means is she paid for the entire dossier and also the opposition research and all that other stuff. She was fined by the FEC, that's the Federal Election Commission. She was found guilty in that and she was fined for it. It's not criminal, but it is, against their, the system as far as when it comes to elections. He just put his foot in his mouth. He just pretty much said, yeah, it's illegal to do it, and she did it. But that you don't see them, dragging her back and forth to court. But another thing too, they keep bragging about how much it cost, him, how he wasted. I think they said it was $6 million for his investigation. But then I bring this to you. What does this say right here? The special counsel, Robert Mueller, leaves after a closed meeting with members of the Senate Judiciary Committee on January 21st, 2017. His investigation has a cost of more than $25 million in direct and indirect costs. $25 million for the Mueller report. But they're jumping on Durham for the 6 that he spent, and he only spent 2 years. The Mueller report, I think it went on for ever since Trump was in office, the 4 there, and then a little bit after. So this is, like I said, that they're just dual justice that's around. Yeah, it's there. That dual justice is visible, but yeah, this will be it. I think they're actually back on right now, but I'm not gonna broadcast the rest of it. I'm gonna see if I can pull some clips, and I'll post those clips. Follow me on those on my other channels. I'm gonna jump on Instagram and see if I can approve some people. Most of the time they let me approve 5, sometimes 20, and sometimes none. So just bear with me because they are really, really, really doing me. And I thought it was me. I was on the phone with AT&T yesterday for 4 hours because anytime I log into my email, I have to change my email, my password on my email address. And they were supposed to call me back today, and they hadn't called back yet, so I'm still waiting on that. And this wasn't yesterday; it was 2 days ago. But thank you guys for following me on here on YouTube. I'm gonna have to let YouTube go. I don't know who that was. I can't think of his name. Even though YouTube is I think they're loosely connected to Rumble, I think, but they don't stop me over there. And I'm going to I was actually doing it while I was on here trying to set everything up. I have a channel that's already set up because anything I post here automatically goes there. But I just hadn't done any lives on Rumble just yet. So later on today, if you guys do me a favor, go ahead and log on there. And I'm going to do a test live probably later on today. Let me set everything up. And I want to do a test live, and that'll probably be later on today. But again, thank you all. You guys are blessed. I love all of you. Thank you. Thank you. John, I know you're gone already. I'm going to call you in a few. We need to talk some money and what's going on in this currency thing. If you don't have currency, look, go to what's the name of it? Trillion. Hold on. Go to this site here, and I want you to buy some currency. It's really cheap. Where is it? There it is. Okay, yeah. All right. I'm going to show it to you guys on here. I want you guys to take a screenshot of this. Go here and get you some currency. Get it and get it now. Order it now because this thing is actually going down. And we suspect sometime within the next week or two. It'll probably be before July. I'm looking for it now. Okay, I don't have it on there, so let me. I'm going to send it to myself. That way I can show it to you without having to do it on there. Okay. There it is. It's not coming over there. Okay, let me do it like this. All right. This thing is still not. See, this is what I'm talking about. I'm just gonna post it in here and hopefully it'll work. Trying to show it to you, but here it is. See if this link will work. If you guys can get to that link. If not, I'm gonna type it in anyway. It's okay. I think I still got a screen open. All right. Go here and get yourself $100 trillion bill or a $50 trillion bill. Get those. They're cheap right now. This 36 for the $36 for the 50 trillion, and it's $69 for the 100 trillion. And actually, I suggest you getting yourself two to 50 trillion. No, it's the two to you 60, 72. Yeah, it's a couple of dollars cheaper. But yeah, come on now. Guess they don't want to open up. Okay, that's fine. Yeah, I'm not sure if you guys can see how it's supposed to look. See that trillionaire, and at the bottom there it has it. There it is, right there. Go there and get some currency. Get it now, because it's going to, trust me. Instead of going to buy that bottle of Hennessy, get you a $50 trillion note. Instead of getting your nails done this week, get you a $50 trillion note. Trust me. And even if that's the only currency you get, it will be well worth your while in getting that. These countries, their currency is, and all you hear is, oh, it's not real. This stuff is not really happening. They're lying to you. No, it has to happen. If everyone is going to be on the gold standard, everything has to be close to dollar for dollar for every country. So in order for it to be that close, everybody has to revalue their currency. Either it's going to go up or it's going to go down. But it depends on what precious metal or natural resource you're bringing to the table. Because countries right now are signing up for BRICS. They are lining up around the building to sign up for the BRICS nation. All right. You don't believe me? Look up BRICS if you get a chance. And just put it in there. Look it up just like that. It's BRICS. Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Those were the original 5. I think they're up to like 70 something countries that's joined in them. All these countries are using their own money. They're getting away from the reserve dollar, the petrodollar reserve. They're getting away from the American dollar. Everyone is using their own currency because it makes sense. I was watching the African leader who said, why should I have to use American dollars to do business with my neighbor here in Africa? Which makes a lot of sense. Why not use our currency that's backed by gold to do transaction with the country that's right next to me? Now, if I want to buy American things, I'll use American money, is what he said. But if I'm going to buy things from this country over here, I can't remember the country. And even if I could remember it, I probably butcher the name of it. But it would say this country over here. But other than that, follow me on that. I got some clips I'm getting ready to download. Whoopi goes crazy again. They're upset at the fact that Trump can still run for president with a felony on his record if they convict him, which they're going to falsely convict him. And I know a lot of black folk out there probably upset at Hunter Biden getting his hands slapped for everything that's going on with him and how he had a felony that form for filling out that form saying that he wasn't on drugs when he filled it out, when he bought his gun, when he was, and he got a slap on the wrist for that, pretty much. A diversionary program. And which in Houston, we do have some diversionary programs, but it's mainly for like DWI and I think assault. I think that has something to do with it. But that one, and then the tax stuff is going to get washed under the table, which we knew that they were going to plead guilty to that. Now, pay attention to what's going on, because I don't care that he's pleading guilty and he gets his hand slapped for those two things, because those are minor compared to what he did. And if you're going to file anything, you file the light stuff first. Let them go, because they have to clean out the judges on down to the district attorneys, local attorneys, everything. They have to clean all of that out, because you can't convict anybody with the people we have in office right now. It won't happen. That's the reason why Durham wasn't able to get the convictions he got, because it was rigged in Washington. Everyone knows that. He presented all the evidence. I mean, it was so blatantly obvious that it was rigged, that all the evidence that was presented, a blind man could have actually convicted, or let me rephrase that. They say you can convict a ham sandwich, where that same ham sandwich could have convicted those people that he took to trial, those two cases that he lost. And they keep bragging about that. Oh, we had all of this and we had all these convictions, but you had two and you lost on those two. Well, you know how it is. These people here, they're going to brag on their little wins, but their wins were all based on lies. That's the reason why most of the people that were convicted were let out of prison and got pardoned, because they were lying about all of it. But it's all going to come to light. But other than that, let me get out of here. Thank you guys for joining in. I'll be back on Rumble. Don't forget, get yourself some currency. All right. 100 trillions with an S.com. 100 trillions.com. Number 100 trillions word.com. All right. I'll talk to you guys later.